The idea of being fair and equal to all of your children during farm succession planning is one that ties many families in knots. During this short video, we're going to look at it, firstly, what it means to be fair, and secondly, what are a few of the strategies that you might use to address this issue. Commonly, when we work with farming families dealing with their farm transfer or their allocation of shares to their children in their wills, this situation arises. We have here 3 children. One of them has worked on the farm for 15 years, the second one has a job off farm, and the third one has worked on the farm for 2 years. Dividing this farm in 3 equal shares raises the question of whether or not this is fair. Obviously, the person who has been on the farm for 15 years has, in all likelihood, added a lot of value over and above any wages they may have been paid to the asset in that time. Even if that's not the case, you can see that the opportunity to have that person highly motivated to continue or to start adding a lot of value in the subsequent years will be decreased. There's the old story of saying that they feel like every time they're grubbing back the spurs that this one's for me and this one's for those other XYZ in the family. We don't want to have that attitude develop. It's one that can cause an enormous amount of resentment. So we need to have a closer look at the type of inequities that we can have developing in farming families. The one that we have been talking about is where one person has worked on the farm for a longer period, and we need to think through whether or not they've had full wages paid, or quite often, as is the case, with reduced or little wages. Even when we have paid full wages, as in award wages, we need to think about whether or not they have worked under award conditions. Did they receive the holidays? Did they work for longer hours? Were there higher expectations on them than you would have had if you had had an employee under award conditions? Sometimes we have one person who's contributed money to the farm business, perhaps from off-farm work, and the inequity that a lot of families struggle with, where they feel everyone has contributed equally, but the farm is only large enough for one person to inherit it. Let's have a quick look at some strategies that families are using. One of them is where, as people work on the farm, their ownership share increases. So the longer they work on the farm, the more that they will own the farm, the greater the share. And a common example that I see here is a family reaches some agreement that every year of labour on the farm is worth a certain percentage of ownership. And I'm only putting this out as an example. It might be something like 3%, and that means that if the person has worked there 15 years, that in fact 45% of the value of the land asset would be considered by the family as a reasonable share. The advantage of this is that the longer you work there, the greater the reward, and the other advantage is that everybody can be treated equally. So someone who has worked there 2 years would receive 2 times the 3% under that scenario, and 6%. It also allows for people who are coming and going from the farm to have their contributions recognised in the same way. Another strategy is where you have an off-farm person, and during the time that the person is working on the farm, that they work with the farming parents to use the value of the farm to help the off-farm person build up a business or to achieve some other end. It might be to buy a house. And so people on the farm are working to get the off-farm person established. And this is seen as a way of balancing the value of the farm asset. Another strategy is where off-farm child or children receive what we call an early inheritance. That is that they receive money now rather than waiting for their share in the will. and this may represent all or part of the value that they would have received out of the farm asset at some future date. Obviously, receiving money now is worth a lot more than waiting for some indeterminate time until the will comes into effect, and there is usually a discount in the amount of money that's received now on that basis. Knowing what will work for you is difficult in this area. I suggest that you start off with a family with a discussion of the needs and wants and an agreement on what would be fair in your family. Don't be persuaded by what other families have seen as fair. Fairness is a very individual thing, and we need to be clear on what your family feel and agree is fair. Once that is understood, document the outcomes of that meeting and with extra advice, including good legal advice, you should be able to develop a series of strategies that will work for your family. If you need help, then we do run a succession planning facilitation service as well. Please contact us if you're interested in talking to us about that.